Well, welcome everyone. I'm Joseph Davis with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. Thanks to those who are joining us virtually as well as in person. And we're excited to have you as we launch a new project by the U.S. Chamber Foundation's T3 Innovation Network. We're calling it the New Data Paradigm. We'll hear about how this can improve the quality, collection, and analysis of education and workforce data. We'll also hear about how this could empower learners and workers with their data through learning and employment records, or LERs. Now, LERs will help increase opportunity and economic mobility for learners and workers. Now, we've got a great lineup for today's webinar. First, we're going to kick it off with Jason Tishko, Senior Vice President at the U.S. Chamber Foundation. And Jason will give us a primer on what we mean by the new data paradigm, including where we are today, where we want to be, and of course, how we get there. Next, we'll hear from Congressman Burgess Owens of Utah, who'll share his thoughts on improving education and career pathways. Then, we'll be joined by Nick Moore from the Department of Education. And finally, we'll talk with education and workforce expert Jane Oates and Senior Policy Advisor at Working Nation. So with that, I want to get into it. So I want to bring in Jason Tishko. Jason, nice to see you. I want to get into the brief. I want to talk about the new data paradigm, but I want to start off talking about the T3 Innovation Network. So for the folks that may not know, could you give us a little bit about the T3 Innovation Network, which of course this project is launching under, and then maybe a little bit about what they've been working on the last several years?
Happy to, Joe, and thank you for joining us for this event. This is a big day for us in the T3 Innovation Network, and just to provide a little bit of context, the T3 Innovation Network, the T stands for talent, the 3 for Web 3.0, but this is a collective action initiative that was kicked off roughly around 2018, and it's meant to bring together hundreds of partners, thousands of professionals, to really think through what are the needs for data interoperability in the talent marketplace. What I mean by that is we had conversations happening among education partners, among employer partners, government, the military, and we all use different technology vendors and data standards for how we're organizing and sharing data. But what the T3 Innovation Network really focused on was how we can exchange data across domain. So very early on, we said we're standards-based, we're use case driven, and we're vendor neutral. And where we've tried to apply our time, attention, and resources are on those collective action problems where, but for a network, these things might not be solved. So for many years now, we've been plugging away, addressing these data interoperability gaps. And one use case that really rose to the top is skills-based hiring and advancement. So yes, we want to do it, but how do we make sure the data we have enables it and the technology also enables it? So we've been working to make sure that there are standards-based approaches for how you organize your resume, how that data can be parsed in HR systems, and pretty much how people can be users of data to access economic mobility, like you said earlier. So T3's been doing a lot of different things, but it's really focusing on that technical layer and trying to make sure that all learning counts, competencies and skills can be transacted like currency, and that at the end of the day, learners and workers are empowered with their data.
Got it. Now, getting into the brief, new data paradigm brief. So first, I guess, want to let folks know we're releasing it today, but I want to ask you why now and what came about to kind of push this project ahead?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, a lot of this work has been happening since 2018 in some form or fashion, and many of the partners that make up the T3 network, the Chamber Foundation is but one, they have really been doing the work on the ground to promote this kind of data access and interoperability. But times are changing, and that's what prompted this new project to be launched. And there's a number of vectors that's driving that change that are detailed in the brief that was released today. I'll just point out a few. The big one is the changing role of the federal government. We've seen the federal government make cuts. They're reorganizing themselves. We're going to hear from Nick Moore later about the Department of Education, the plans there. We have an interagency agreement between Department of Labor and Ed. We have an America's Talent Strategy that brings in commerce. So lots of things are happening, and we know the role is changing. And we also know that there's a lot of promotion around government efficiency, and we've seen that manifest itself in the form of a lot of budget reductions. Now, at the same time, that we are changing the role, the federal role, and we are, in some cases, disinvesting in some of this data infrastructure, the demand for data is going up. So we can see that in recent activity that Congress has undertaken, where we'll hear from Congressman Owens in a little bit. But we know that there is a greater demand for data for the administration of government programs, but also for folks that want to understand the outcomes that are happening around a lot of our credentialing, our education, our training. So data infrastructure is being reduced in some cases, or at least changing, and the demand is going up. And at the same time, new use cases have emerged. For example, you mentioned learning and employment records. We really are wanting to make sure that people are empowered with data about their experiences, whether education, employment, or otherwise. And we're able to do that in incremental ways. But right now, a lot of the current data infrastructure doesn't enable it at scale. And we've keyed in that this is fundamentally a design problem. So these things and more, and not to mention AI and other technology that's proving to be truly disruptive, we just think this is a very unique moment where change can accelerate and needs to accelerate. So we really want to see this as an opportunity, and we want to seize the moment and really try to put forward some big, bold, beautiful ideas that we can actually take action around and finally empower people with data.
Well, the big idea is the new data paradigm. So I'll ask, the new data paradigm suggests there's an old one. So are we still in the old one? Are we in a new one now? Are we transitioning to the new data paradigm? And I guess the other side of that one is, what makes it different?
Yep. So there's been a lot of efforts underway, depending on when you want to start the clock, the last 20, 30 years, where we've been building out a data infrastructure for education and workforce data. And what I'm going to argue and what the paper argues is that this was principally built by government for government. And what I mean by that is the key beneficiaries have been policymakers that want to do evidence-based policymaking, researchers that are trying to gather better information so they can study it and put information out there for us, as well as managers who are operating programs at the state and sub-state level that are trying to use data to make better decisions for our learners, workers, and their families. And what we found is it's been a bit of a mixed bag in terms of results. There's been some great lessons learned, but we've also run into a lot of complications. One that I work on through our JEDX initiative at the Chamber Foundations, the Jobs and Employment Data Exchange, is we have 53 different collection systems for unemployment insurance, wage records. And across all 53 systems, there isn't a shared data model or definition. So how do we kind of solve that collective action problem? But that's not just an employer problem. Think about what that means for student information system vendors serving the education and training marketplace. So the list goes on, but we've through the current data paradigm, we've manifested a lot of data silos, and we've been trying to work at breaking down some of those silos. But what really stood out to me is, even if you're to merge two different data sets, you still have a data silo. And if at the end of the day, we're trying to figure out how do we empower learners and workers, it's going to take us, it's going to take a new direction. So that's what the new data paradigm is bringing in. It's the idea that through modern technology, through new data standards, new APIs and ways of sharing the data, but we need to modernize our education and workforce data infrastructure. And by doing that, we can satisfy the leading use cases of the current data paradigm, which is largely built around compliance reporting and administrative records. But while we're solving that, we think it's a unique opportunity through the new data paradigm to finally empower learners and workers with data first, not last, and to do it at scale. So there's universal access to data about your experiences that you can take action with. And that action could be applying for a job. It could be something else, like seeking prior learning credit in a college or university. So we think the sky's the limit, but now's the time to make the big shift and say we can't just solve for the compliance reporting challenges of the current paradigm. We need to build it such that it is designed to serve learners and workers first, not last.
Now, I don't want to overstate it, but going back to the brief, I think there's an idea in the brief that may be the biggest idea, and that's the idea of a public-private data utility. So first, I guess, what is it? And explain to folks what that is, and then why is it important, and what role does it play?
Yep. Yeah, so in the brief, we introduced this concept of a nationwide federated public-private data utility. It's a mouthful. But essentially what we're trying to get at is that metaphor of a utility. Think of it this way. We can run wires, we can build pipes that connect government agencies, that connect colleges and universities to K-12 school districts, to training providers, to employers. And we can fix the flow of, in this case, data to those across those partners to solve their use cases. But the power of the utility concept is we can run transmission to neighborhoods, to households, to get something to the people themselves, the learners and workers, so they too are benefiting from the data that's being produced about them. So we think it's a useful metaphor. It's a concept for how the new data paradigm should operate. And if we're able to kind of break free from the current paradigm, it allows us to think very differently about what our assets look like. And these aren't necessarily just the traditional federal and state data silos and infrastructure. Now it's a public-private data infrastructure. Now it's federated across the country where shared data standards and APIs could connect all of our data more seamlessly, so it could reduce reporting burden and cost, improve the quality of the data, but most importantly of all, Joe, We can give people a little bit of data so they could do something with it.
I like it. I like it. Okay, so brief is out today. Concept we've introduced. Next steps, what should we expect, whether that's related to the brief or the project itself?
Yeah, so this really is the start of a conversation. And typically we put out a very kind of polished product. And in this case, we wanted to put out a working draft. And we want this to catalyze a conversation. And this conversation is going to run between now and April of next year, where we want to bring folks in who want to lean into this conversation. Come in and discuss it, debate it, let's flush it out, and let's begin building what the new looks like. We do not pretend to have all the answers, but we want to bring a community of folks in, the ready and the willing, who want to come in and shape this and figure out how we can get this done, get it done affordably, get it done for the right reasons to serve the right beneficiaries, which are learners and workers themselves. So we are using this opportunity to invite a dialogue, and if something about this is resonating with you, whether it's the new data paradigm concept or this idea of a public-private data utility or middleware, we encourage you to come in and help us figure this out. So please join us. This is a call to action, and I think we're going to learn a heck of a lot between now and April, but the conversation starts now.
Got it. Jason, thanks so much. We appreciate it. And we'll be right back with Congressman Burgess Owens from Utah. Oh, grab it. We are back, and I want to bring in Congressman Burgess Owens of Utah to talk a little bit about creating pathways. Congressman, how you doing?
Yes. Hey, Joe, how you doing? First of all, looking forward to chatting with you. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for being here. I know you're busy, so I know we got to get in and get out. But what I wanted to do was give you a quick minute to talk a little bit about your background and what led you to Congress. I know you have an interesting background, so I wanted to give you a couple minutes to talk about, one, that background, but also why education and creating pathways is important to you.
Well, first of all, I appreciate the little conversation you had with Jason. That sets the tone for what we have to get done. I've been blessed. I grew up in a very focused educational environment. My dad was an educator for 40 years at college, Florida A&M. And I grew up at a time when education was really our gateway. So for us to have a conversation now about how important this is, the founders understood this. Ignorant and free can never be. And we need to make sure that we're educating ourselves, our kids, using technology that doesn't just give us degrees, but gives us the opportunity to go out and get a good job, get a good career, and build out into the middle class. So this is one of the most, I think, important conversations we can have. I want to thank the chamber and those, the stakeholders who kind of started this process maybe 5-6 years ago, and then had to kind of go through a period where no one really seemed to be interested. So the idea of a public-private partnership is so important. We need to bring innovators to this process. We need to know that in order for us to not only make sure our kids are prepared to go to work, but there's a workforce ready for them immediately with a lot less cost to get the education and going out and building your dreams and get into the middle class. So I'll just say this is one of those conversations I'm excited about being part of. I feel honored to be part of. I think at the end of the day, when we talk about legacy, there's a lot of things we're doing right, but if we cannot educate our kids, get them prepared to go into the middle class, take those values that our country has always been about, we cannot do that, then we're failing them. And being able to use our data in a very smart way is a big piece of it. Let me just tell you where I kind of started with this, because we had a visit from Nick Saban about maybe 4 years ago. Nick Saban, of course, the coach of Alabama, one of the best in history of college sports. And he came to talk about something not in this regard, but I linked it to what we're talking about right now. He says, at University of Alabama, we can identify a young man in 7th grade. By the time he gets to 11th grade, we can offer him a scholarship. And the reason why is that young man is aware of what Alabama offers him, whether it be the colors, whether it be the culture, whether it be an opportunity maybe to get to the NFL. He has an incentive to want to get to that particular team because he knows that's where his dreams can be fulfilled. At the same time, Alabama has identified this young man with the talents he has, the skills he has, and they want to make sure they continue to allow him to prepare himself to come to them. So they make sure that all the advantages, whether it be the success they're having with NFL, whether it be the income, whatever it might be, that allows that young man to be self-disciplined, to pay the price, to get the education, to drive his passion to get to Alabama. By the 11th grade, it's a win-win for both. That's what we have to start doing with our workforce process. We need to be using technology, AI, the API apps, all those things to not only educate the parents, but also allow these young people as young as 6th, 7th grade to know what their passion might be, know what they really want to put their time and effort into, and what drives them, so they're self-motivated to pay the price, so they're ready when they come out of high school or when they go to four-year college, they're ready to go into the things that they want to be part of. So this is a very, very important conversation. I'm so thankful again that we can talk about a public-private partnership where innovation should be coming from the private sector. The incentives for the innovators to make this happen, to build this culture, should be coming from the public. So I see that as a big win for both of us.
Now, Congressman, you're obviously lead the Higher Education and Workforce Development Subcommittee in Congress. So I guess I want to ask, what's top of mind for you? And also thinking about what's in the brief, some of the issues that are brought up there. What's top of mind for you as it relates to that?
First of all, the brief is something that, matter of fact, when I saw it, I started sending it out immediately. I think it is it's so well put together, and it gives you an idea of the vision that we should have. I would say the timing couldn't be any better. The position I'm in, and I'm on the Education Workforce Committee, is the only committee that I knew I wanted to be part of when I made the decision to come to Congress, because I know how important that is. And we have too many of our young people never having a chance to even tap into their potential, because they never get the opportunity to know how to learn how to think, read, write, and dream. So I see this, a couple things. Let's look at where we are now. We have a deficit in workforce at this point. There is 8.5 million job openings at this point. At the same time, there's 6.5 million unemployment. Now, so we're already $2 million deficit. We need to make sure we can fill that in by not only realizing, reaching back and finding young people earlier, but how about we start to think about places where people need to have jobs. Opportunity zones is a good example. This is where this partnership, this conversation can start to happen. Opportunity zones, we have 8,700 of them around the country, 31 million people represented. The unemployment rate is 14% versus what we have across our country, close to 4%. If we can figure out a way to incentivize trade or education, using this LER concept to reach into these communities, to give these folks hopes that they can actually build their businesses in that area, or build their careers in that area, or move out, whatever that might be. Those are things we need to be talking about, and using technology like this that has no boundaries of zip codes, has no boundaries of states. This is what we need to start thinking about. How can we reach out to everyone that understands how to use an app, and give them the data, give them the ability to make this happen. It's going to be very, very exciting. One other thing, something on interoperability. Every state has a way of gathering data. I think it's called P20. We have to develop this infrastructure that goes across our country, that no matter what state it is, what zip code, they can access this. They can access this interstate and get on and get off when they need to. And that's really what the LER comes down to. It's an opportunity to be portable, to have personal, to be secure, and yet we can talk to all the different platforms and all the different industries from where you are, and realize what your dreams might be, and get the information you need to grow your career, do your career mapping, and know what you need to do to get to where you want to go, what you want to succeed in.
And Congressman, you teed me up, so I want to stay there for a second. You mentioned LERs, so I know it's a passion of yours. Can you tell us why, and what kind of role do you feel like it plays in the future of work?
Thank you. LERs, learning employment records. This is probably the most important conversation we're going to have, and this was what the brief was really all about, is how do we take technology, how do we get past the limitations that we have right now to make sure that every American has access to some way of mapping their careers, finding that passion. What we found out over the last 4 years is everybody doesn't have to go to a 4-year college, but everyone still wants to dream and be successful. So what LER does, it actually is a digital record of everything we've done, our skill set, our certificates, our degrees, our passion. And there's also a place we can map our careers to see what we need to do next to get to that next phase. So this, and it's a personal, it's private, it's something we can give to others if we want to, but it's also secure. So this record just allows us to always know what the next steps might be. And again, it might be outside of the small town we're living in, but you can access opportunities, careers, and industries that you might have a drive for, and they can know who you are based on your record, on your digital record. So this is one of those technologies that we have to go with, because it is the next phase of making sure that we can keep up with the demand we're going to have over the next few years. We have over $5 trillion of investment coming back to our country. That it doesn't do us any good if we cannot be trained to take the jobs that's being generated from that process. So what this does is allows us, and I'm so thankful for the chamber. They're seeing it, they understand it, they're innovators, and now we have in Congress innovative legislators that's willing to work side by side. So whether it be looking at opportunity zones, whether it be looking at more ways to make sure we're not siloed, that we're interoperable across these different platforms, we're going to do our part to make sure we're partnering up with these great innovators to make sure that all of our kids, no matter where they are, have the opportunity to build their dreams.
That's great. Now, Congressman, there's an idea in the brief about a data utility. So thinking about bringing together federal, state, and private partners, I guess the question is, do you think this could work? Do you think this concept can make sense and work going ahead?
It makes total sense because it's already happening. We have, and again, it's very disjointed at this point because entrepreneurs, innovators do their thing, and sometimes in silos. What we have a chance to do on the federal side is accommodate, help them to be able to communicate. When I talk about interoperability, I cannot speak highly enough about that. That means that it's like an interstate that goes from east to west in our country, and every state has an on-ramp and an off-ramp. That on-ramp and off-ramp is the data, is how they use it, but yet because they're on the same interstate, we can communicate to each other. So this is something that, first of all, I'm so excited that the chamber has decided to buy into it, because this has been a real difficult thing. With everything that's going on in DC, it's not quite as important. It's not the highlight it used to be back 4 years ago. So we have the entrepreneurs, the innovators now taking part, and all we have to do now is make sure we're supporting them in any way possible. If we can allow, again, our businesses to prosper, what happens from that? When businesses prosper, our middle class grows. As our middle class grows, our culture continues to thrive and grow with it. So it's really so important that not only corporations but small businesses are thriving, and when we can educate our people, our Americans, to go into industries that is needed at that moment in the areas that they're growing up in, knowing what their passions might be, that they'll be excited about it for their lifetime because it's something they're getting into, they know they're going to enjoy doing. So that's how we can pull this together, bring innovation to education and a workforce that we just have never had like this before. So again, I'm excited about what's happening. I think the fact we have a timeline of a year, that a lot of things will be going on, is so exciting to me also, because there's a goal that we're going for, and there's a timeline that we're working toward to make that happen.
That's right. Congressman, thanks so much for your insights. I know we got to get you out of here. I'm going to let you go on this one note. Your father went to Florida A&M, and I want to let you know my father went to Florida A&M. So I'm born and raised Tallahassee, so I wanted to mention that before we got off.
Thank you so much for that. I lived in the shadows, and that's where I used to go work out every single day. So thank you. It was a great experience. I was really very, very excited about being that close to FAMU, for sure.
Awesome. Congressman, thanks so much for your time.
All right, all the best, buddy. Take care. Bye-bye.
We'll be back with Nick Moore from the Department of Education in just a second. And we're back. Nick, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Before we jump in, I want to talk about a couple things. So I know we have a few things to hit. But first, I wanted to give you an opportunity to give a little bit about your background and kind of what led you into a lot of what we're talking about today.
Well, appreciate that, Joe, and it's good to be with you, and appreciate Jason teeing up this conversation. Appreciate Congressman Owens laying out the vision for why we're doing this work, and I love his interstate analogy, and I think that's right, is that we're trying to reinvigorate economic, social, and geographic mobility in this country, and I think the preparation that a lot of folks in town here, but particularly governors, have done over the last decade, working with the private sector, working with trade associations, working with groups like the Chamber, have prepared us for the opportunity in this moment to make some strong, appreciable progress on increasing our nation's labor force participation rate and our post-secondary attainment rate, which had to be done concurrently. So what brought me to this work is serving in the last nearly a decade in Governor Ivey's office in Alabama. We were very excited to put together a system that brings together a credential registry, a skills-based job description generator, and a learning and employment record, as you and the congressman described, into a full-scale talent marketplace. But what we quickly realized is that political boundaries and commuting patterns in people's daily lives don't respect arbitrary political boundaries. And so the need to interoperate these systems to make sure that if I move from Alabama to Mississippi or from Arkansas to California, that I can take my learning with me and make sure that I can translate, transcribe, and transact those skills. And, as Jason mentioned, to make sure that there is a portable currency that's predicated on skills.
Got it. Now, you kind of teed me up there too, collaboration, connectivity. I wanted to talk a little bit about the interagency agreement. So Education and Labor recently announced this new agreement that kind of shifts responsibilities between the two agencies. Can you talk a little bit about that? Explain to folks what it is,
Sure.
why it's important, what we can expect from it.
Congress aligned the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, WIOA, as it's known colloquially, and PERC and CTE by design. And so on paper, these programs are supposed to be working together to create a seamless secondary to post-secondary talent strategy. Now, in reality, there is often limitations to the amount of integration that can happen, not because states and governors and workforce boards and educators aren't doing what they need to do, but sometimes the federal agencies calcify and we put up roadblocks. So, for example, not being able to have a consistent timeline for when the state's CTE plan versus the state's WIOA plan needs to be submitted, or not having the right level of cross-training among federal staff so that if I ask a question, I can get a consistent answer. So through this partnership with the Department of Labor, we're going to be working to make a concierge level service, customer service regime for states and grantees, so that what we're doing is reducing the slippage in the transition points, really beginning in the earliest years of learning to where students don't know what they can be because they haven't seen what there is to be, all the way through matriculating into a registered apprenticeship program as the sort of gold standard of work-based learning.
Got it. Now, one related thing I want to ask you about, so Labor, Education, and Commerce recently released a big report, America's Talent Strategy, and this is tied to a White House executive order. So what you were just talking about kind of connects to that, so the interagency agreement. How do they kind of play with each other? Like, how are they related?
Well, what the president wants to do is to make sure that we don't have too much system in the money. When it comes to the federal workforce system, there's just far too much bureaucracy, and it's not designed primarily with the worker and the state's interest in mind. So we're trying to flip that script to make sure that there are fewer moving parts federally and that more money gets out the door to the states, and that employers in particular have ways to co-design training programs with education and training providers, and that we're not chasing program eligibility requirements and the proclivities of how a program is designed, but rather we're designing those programs to meet the needs of learners and earners. So this strategy lays out a number of actions, not only for the Department of Education, but as you mentioned, Labor and Commerce, because there's over 43 federally funded workforce programs across 9 agencies. So these are not the only 3 agencies that are involved, but just the primary training agencies. But the next step is to make sure we're working with other partners like USDA, HHS that manage SNAP and TANF programs, so that we can not only get people into a training program, but help them to persist and overcome what a lot of people have identified as benefit cliffs, to where as somebody is moving into paid employment, we need to make sure that as they're transitioning off of means-tested transfer payment programs, that they're able to make up for that in real dollar terms through paid employment.
Got it, got it. Now I want to touch on the brief. So thinking about the brief, of course, we mentioned a little bit earlier, how does that tie into your work now and your role now? And what do you see in terms of a future, of course, thinking about what was proposed in the brief?
Well, it's almost by serendipity to where I think the stars have aligned to where you've not only got leadership at the federal level that understands the need to have a public-private partnership, as Jason outlined, to create a national public data utility. And what this means is that we're not going to create a cookie-cutter approach that in some ways has dominated the conversation for the last several years, to where we're going to try to require everybody to structure their data into the same ontology or taxonomy. But it's the notion that we're going to structure data by interoperating it so that an employer doesn't have to buy a new HRIS system or applicant tracking system. Your local community college doesn't have to invest in a new student information system, but we're able to make sure that these data can communicate through advances in technology like application program interfaces, like AI that can be able to parse the outcomes through a time and credit-based assertion. Now, if you look at your transcript, generally it's going to tell you how many courses you took and what your degree was. But what we need is some richer provenance and skills data behind that to say, what are the discrete skills that you earned in those experiences? And then using AI to be able to match that up with an employer competency statement, so that what we're truly doing through this work, and I think what this brief will lead us to do throughout this administration, is to do what we have only been able to talk about and sort of navel gaze on, which is to connect education and the workforce in reality. And to do that, you have to have this common credential currency, to where I can own my learning in terms of these competency statements, and whether I'm a veteran that's got a joint service transcript, whether I'm somebody that's been self-employed or somebody that's got a PhD from an Ivy League university, we're able to reduce all of those learning assertions down to the molecular skills level.
Got it. Now, at the top, I talked about LERs empowering learners and workers. Jason touched on it. The congressman touched on it. So for you, thinking about learning and employment records, is that a priority for the government? And I guess the other side of that, like, what do we need to do and how could we make it a reality where it is something that's central?
No, it's certainly necessary, but it's not sufficient, because what we've got to do is to make sure that we are, and I think that's what this brief and the new data paradigm gets at, is that having an institutionally based learning and employment record, or just having one state do it, we'll just have a bunch of pockets of excellence or unicorns throughout the country. If we're going to have a scalable solution, we must have signals between the supply and the demand side, and some of this has a behavioral aspect. We need to see institutions leaning into things like Workforce Pell and the other innovations in post-secondary finance and OB3, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. But to do that, institutions need to see that hiring managers are actually developing using skills-based job descriptions. And so it goes beyond just signing an executive order or making a proclamation that you're going to do skills-based hiring. You have to have the infrastructure to get you there. And so it's much like in the early 20th century, to where we were, whether it's building out the a network of gas stations to be able to power internal combustion engines, or whether it's building a fleet of EV charging stations, or building out the electrical grid. This work that we're doing to put together talent marketplaces that include LERs, but also on the demand side, a way for an employer to translate their job description into a framework that can then, if I'm a learner, to say, okay, well, I've got 80% of the skills for that job, I can go to a community college or do an apprenticeship to get the delta, and then also to see how I can stack my credentials or my skills up to get to the next opportunity.
Now, one thing I wanted to ask you, I guess from the government perspective, any challenges, any considerations we should be making and thinking about, especially thinking about some of the concepts that were introduced in the brief. Any challenges you see moving forward?
Well, I think the biggest challenge is to make sure that we are not doing more than what is within the federal purview. So we need to play more the role of an umpire rather than trying to prescribe what the solution is going to look like. And so that's why it's important to have groups like the Chamber leading this effort, because it will be employer sectoral partnerships and employers getting together and telling us what the recipe is for the jobs that are not only in demand, but jobs that will come online that we're just learning about now. And then also, how do we keep this new data paradigm up to date so that systems like ONET that the Department of Labor uses to represent jobs, the CTE programs of study that we use to represent the way that a student would become prepared for a career, we've got to keep those up to date. So one of the biggest, it's a challenge, but also an opportunity, is imagine, if you will, that employers have access to a representation of what a job would look like in terms of its skills as a blueprint, but each employer, their work process looks a little bit different. If they give back to us the frequency at which they make those adjustments, and we're able to up-to-date our systems of record and those blueprints to be more in real time with the changes that they're actually making. And so that would get beyond the vagaries of our current systems that are a little bit wooden and static. Sometimes they're based on survey, but they're certainly not up to date.
Awesome. Well, Nick, a lot to think about. I just want to say thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And to let folks know, we'll be back in a minute with Jane Oates.
Thank you.
And we are back with Jane Oates. Jane, first of all, good to see you again.
Great to see you, Joe.
First, I want to kind of get into a little bit of your background. So, you've been a great partner to the Chamber Foundation and the business community. I know that personally and directly. But I want to, you started in the Senate and Labor. So going back, thinking about that, thinking about your experience, how does that play a role? And asking how does that play a role, I'm thinking about the brief released today. So a lot of the concepts and what we're talking about, what do you think from your experience, and what are you bringing into this conversation that we've been talking about today?
Well, Joe, for decades, we've been talking about data-based decision-making. And, I was one of those people, first as a researcher at a university, and then when I worked on the Hill, on the Help Committee, and then at the Department of Labor, who really relied on quality data, wanted to see that programs were working. But the system, the siloed system, as both Nick and Jason and the congressman brought up, the siloed system that we have is a 20th century system. It's time for us to come into the 21st century, because in the 20th century, there weren't things like common dual enrollment, that high school kids were taking post-secondary credentials while still enrolled. Today, we have thousands of kids who graduate with a high school diploma and one or several industry-recognized credentials, and either go right to work or go on to post-secondary education. But many times they forget about those credentials that they earned. So I think now, instead of just and I think Jason said this as well, just making a data system that's built for researchers and government, we need to make it real for individuals and for employers. And I think that's what this brief talks about.
Well, and we also talk about in the brief, a new data approach would empower learners and workers. You've heard it a couple times today. Mm-hmm. is what's missing there? Thinking about the empowerment of learners and workers, where do you see, are there any missing pieces, and what should we be thinking about?
I think the challenge is going to be, how do we get that message to everybody? How do we build a system that's accessible, high quality, but also relevant to real people? So who do we engage in that partnership? Do we need to make sure libraries are involved, because many people rely on libraries for their internet access? But I think the key is really going to be employers, because the common denominator for every learner is they want a job, or they want a better job. So the fact of having those employers really engaged in this, I mean, I envision large employers having kiosks in their place of business once this gets rolling. I envision this being something that you can do at fast food restaurants, that you can engage it, because it's going to be so important for employers to make sure what? To make sure that they have a great picture of what skills people have. I mean, what's the thing slowing down skills-based hiring? Employers don't know exactly what the skills are for every job. And most people, even people that are well educated like you and I and the people in the audience, can't accurately articulate their own skills. Because the first thing you say is, I went to at Florida A&M, or I went to Boston College. That's old school. You've got to be able to talk about how you've accessed credentials that aren't necessarily traditional degrees. Things like Google and Microsoft, things like OpenAI, things like Coursera. How do you keep that all in one place? Again, for people who don't move a lot, for people who are very well organized, that's not me. As you know, with jobs, I move a lot. It's easy to keep one drawer with all your credentials in it. But for most people, mobility is a part of their lives, and keeping track of their credentials is just not happening.
Thinking about the conversation I just had with Nick, I know your perspective is a little different now in your work now. Is there, what your folks know, not from the governmental side, but thinking about business, thinking about nonprofit, what should that side of the table be thinking about in terms of collaboration also, along with other partners?
I think that's really an important question, Joe. And I think the thing that is most important in my mind is that everybody's dealing with a pace of change on the workforce side, on the job front, that we've never seen before. Literally, AI, we know automation changed things quickly, particularly if you think about a manufacturing floor. But AI is changing every single job. It's making us more efficient, and the school's out yet, in my opinion, on whether it's going to create more jobs than it eliminates, or vice versa. But the reality is, it's changing every job. So how do we have a system that can keep up with that pace of change? Because the government system does annual collections, or in some cases, monthly collections. We should have data that's real time, and people should have access to that data. Think of the average person who has maybe 6 credentials and a degree and a diploma. They have to go to the educational institution they went to. They have to go to their State Department of Labor to figure out how they get all this stuff. People don't have that time anymore. They want to apply for the job today and be able to qualify for it by the end of next week.
Now, I think about your work at Working Nation, thinking about some of the stories you tell about education, about employment, from individuals in communities. Thinking about this new data paradigm, what kind of role could that play in some of those stories that we see and hear?
I think it could change them dramatically, because so many times when Working Nation would go to a place, our filmmakers, our journalists would talk to people, people didn't know what the opportunities were. People didn't understand labor market data. And certainly, even programs, if you think when we've done a lot of stories about programs with nonprofits, with employers, with community colleges, with four-year colleges, and they couldn't access wage record data. So they could never really talk about the outcome data that human beings are most interested in. How much am I going to make at that job? So they always relied on self-attestation. So you finished my program, and I would write you an email 6 months later and say, we know you got placed in job X. How are you doing now? How much money are you making? First of all, the response rate was always really low. Anybody who's honest will tell you that. But the other piece that people aren't honest about are they giving their pre-tax salary? Are they giving their hourly wage? They're confused. And so forth. That means that the data they get back is a mismatch. And they can't clearly articulate to new participants, people who successfully complete this program go on for these job titles and make these wages. This new paradigm will shift that. The learner will get all the information that they need to make the right choices about where to take a job or where to go to fill the gaps in order to qualify for the job they want.
Got it. Now, this is the good one that I want to hear from you on.
Uh-oh.
Thinking about public-private collaboration. Could this work rise above the politics of our time?
You know, that really is the million-dollar question. Because, you know, when Nick talked about, and the document that they put out is really thoughtful, and I think it got a lot of positive response from both sides of the aisle. But I think the reality is we've been there before. You know, in my time in the Obama administration, we worked hand in hand with the Department of Education doing the college, what became known as the TACT grants. You know, for 2 years, you couldn't tell where education ended and ETA began. So what happened in the last 2 administrations since Obama, it kind of went by the wayside, that partnership. So I'm hoping that now they have a formal agreement. Hopefully they'll hold themselves accountable to that formal agreement and we'll get great data about that. But I think more importantly, moving this to the governors care more about efficiency and speed than the federal government does. Everybody cares about quality. Everybody cares about protecting personal information. But we need speed now. We need to make sure that people get access to this information as soon as possible. Because I really thought it was interesting when Nick brought up the labor market participation rate. You know, 62% of our people are working, able-bodied people. That's crazy. We need to get that number up, and we need to make those people that are sitting on the sidelines aware that they have skills. They now will have a way to access and articulate their skills, and let's get them to work. We need everybody that can working in this country.
I think I know the answer to this,
Uh-oh.
but I'm going to ask anyway. Thinking about the approach that's talked about in the brief, do you think it's realistic? And if so, what do you think comes after?
Look, I think we have to make sure it's realistic. You know, some of the people, I know most of the people that are here in the audience, I've seen them at other things, so they know the Chamber Foundation, they know how you work. But the people online who are watching this, some of them probably from my party are saying, the U.S. Chamber, I don't know whether I want to get involved in this. I'm here to tell all of them, and you know I feel this way. Nobody's more navy blue than I am. But the reality is, Jason was sincere when he said get involved in this. If we can get people from all sides, every kind of stakeholder involved in the development of this, then it will be harder for it to disappear because we'll have so many people buying in. Look at, you know, talent pipeline management. It started in 2 or 3 places. It's everywhere across the country now. And nobody cares what party you are. Everybody cares about quality and getting the job done. That job being getting people the skills they need so that they can get into the jobs they want. I think if we do this right, if we all say, push the envelope on this draft is really that. And while Jason's last name is difficult to spell, he's very easy to find. So everybody should find him. Joe is much easier to spell. So if you can't find Jason, find Joe.
I mean let's slow down on telling folks to contact me, okay?
But if everybody that hears about this and reads this brings their comment and their brilliance to this project, nobody can defeat this.
Jane, awesome as usual. I appreciate you being here with us. Thanks
Fabulous,
so much
Thank
for
you.
doing this. And that puts a good cap on this conversation today. I want to thank everybody here. I want to thank our guests. And we'll be talking more about the new data paradigm. And now, while we're closing out this webinar, the conversation will move forward. So be sure to check out the brief that we've talked about now on our website. Go to uschamberfoundation.org and you can check it out. And if you have any questions following this webinar, you can email our team at workforce@uschamber.com. And look out for a little bit more from us on this project and others in the coming months. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you again soon.